I sold your house to teach you some respect, my stepmom snapped over the phone. The new owners move in next week. I couldn't help but smile, thinking about the quiet meeting I'd had with my late father's lawyer. Good luck with that, I told her. She had no idea what was about to hit her. The ice in her voice was colder than the deepest winter, but her words were the real shocker. I sold your house to teach you a lesson about respect. I was Chloe Sterling, 27 years old, and sitting in my tiny San Francisco apartment, the morning light struggling to break through the fog, when that phone call ripped through the quiet. My stepmother, Tiffany, was practically purring with malicious satisfaction on the other end. The new owners move in next week, she added, as if delivering a final, crushing blow. But here's the thing, my hand didn't even tremble as I held the receiver. A slow, knowing smile touched my lips as I remembered a secret meeting with my late father's lawyer. Good luck with that, I replied, my voice calm, almost too calm. She had absolutely no idea what was coming. My dad, Arthur, had made sure of it, orchestrating a plan from beyond the grave before cancer took him from us last year. Before I dive into this absolute whirlwind of family drama, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Drop your location in the comments below. And if you're ready for a story of real family justice that will leave you absolutely speechless, hit that like button and subscribe. The house at the heart of all this wasn't just any house. It was a magnificent Victorian in Boston's historic Beacon Hill neighborhood. Think deep red brick, sharp black shutters, and intricate moldings that whispered stories from 1887. My grandparents had bought it in the 1950s for what now seems like a mythical price, leaving it to my dad, their only child. That house was more than just walls and a roof. It was the sacred backdrop to every single significant memory of my childhood. Dad, a brilliant architect with his own thriving firm, meticulously taught me to appreciate every single inch of that home's craftsmanship. While other kids were lost in Saturday morning cartoons, Dad and I would embark on architectural expeditions through the house. He'd point out the hand-carved balusters on the grand staircase, the way the sunlight kissed the original heart pine floors, and the intricate plasterwork that adorned the ceilings, each detail a testament to a bygone era. Chloe, he'd say, his fingers tracing a delicate crown molding, they don't make homes like this anymore. This craftsmanship? It's a lost art. He'd lift me, a tiny girl, so I could touch the ceiling medallions, explaining how they were created by Italian artisans who had crossed an ocean with nothing but their skills and dreams. This house is our legacy, Maddie, he'd tell me, his voice resonant with love and pride. Someday, it'll be yours to care for. My mother, Eleanor, an interior designer with an uncanny talent for blending modern comfort with historical integrity, loved that house just as fiercely as Dad. Together, they transformed it into a masterpiece of both breathtaking beauty and lived-in warmth. I remember the jewel-tone library, its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves brimming with tales and knowledge, the kitchen with its cool soapstone counters and chef-grade appliances tucked discreetly behind period-appropriate cabinetry. And Mom's sunroom, a vibrant, glass-enclosed haven where she nurtured her collection of rare orchids, each bloom a testament to her gentle spirit. Our life felt, in every sense of the word, perfect. But perfection, as I painfully learned, can shatter. When I was 13, Mom was diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer. The house, once so full of laughter and light, transformed into a place of hushed conversations and the sterile hum of medical equipment. The sunroom, Mom's sanctuary, became a place where she could still feel the warmth of the sun, even when she was too weak to go outside. I was 15 when we lost her. The grief was a physical weight, crushing Dad and me in profoundly different ways. I retreated, spending hours in my room or in Mom's sunroom, whispering to her plants as if they could somehow hear me, feel her absence too. Dad, in contrast, threw himself into his work, sometimes staying at the office for days, unable to face coming home to a house so utterly saturated with Mom's absence. For nearly 2 agonizing years, it was just the two of us, adrift in our sorrow, clinging to each other in the vast emptiness Mom had left behind. Then came the charity gala for cancer research. Dad went, a painful pilgrimage to honor Mom's memory, and that's where he met Tiffany Campbell. Tiffany was, in every conceivable way, the antithesis of my mother. Loud, flashy, utterly attention-seeking. Where Mom had been thoughtful, genuine, and quietly elegant, Tiffany was calculated, performative, and undeniably crass. Yet, she made Dad laugh again, a sound I hadn't heard in what felt like an eternity. How could I begrudge him that, even when she started showing up at our house for dinner 3 times a week? "Be nice to Tiffany," Dad would plead before she arrived, a hopeful, almost desperate note in his voice. "She makes me happy, Chloe." So I tried. I really, truly tried. But from the very beginning, Tiffany made it abundantly clear that our family home, the one steeped in generations of history and my mother's exquisite taste, wasn't to her liking. "This place is so old," she'd declare, running a perfectly manicured finger along our antique sideboard. "Wouldn't it be nice to update things? Get rid of all this dark wood. Brighten the place up." Each suggestion felt like an active erasure of my mother's presence. The dated wallpaper in the dining room that Mom had painstakingly chosen. The old-fashioned clawfoot tub where Mom and I used to share bubble baths when I was tiny. The cluttered bookshelves, filled with volumes that held Mom's handwritten notes in the margins, each one a tiny piece of her soul. When Dad announced their engagement after only 8 months of dating, I forced a smile, my insides churning. I was 17, clinging to the hope that I only needed to endure Tiffany for 1 more year before college offered me a merciful escape. The wedding itself was a lavish spectacle, Tiffany's choice, of course, not Dad's. He would have preferred something intimate, like his wedding to my mother in our backyard garden. Instead, it was a 200-person extravaganza at one of Boston's most opulent hotels. I stood beside them as the maid of honor, a silent witness, watching as Tiffany beamed at the photographer rather than at my father during their vows. It was a telling detail, a glimpse into her true priorities. After the honeymoon, the changes accelerated with terrifying speed. Tiffany began redecorating immediately, a whirlwind of destruction. Room by room, my mother's delicate touch was systematically eradicated. The antique Persian rugs, carefully chosen by Eleanor, were replaced with jarring, modern geometric patterns. The warm, inviting colors of our home gave way to stark, emotionless whites and grays. Family photos were rearranged, pushing Eleanor and me into the background, prominently featuring Tiffany, with many of the pictures showcasing just Dad, Mom, and me disappearing altogether. Dad seemed oblivious, or perhaps he was simply grateful not to be alone anymore. When I tried to talk to him about it, he'd brush off my concerns. "Your mother would want us to move forward, Chloe," he'd say, a flicker of defensiveness in his eyes. "Tiffany needs to feel like this is her home, too." But it stretched far beyond mere redecorating. Tiffany began subtly, then overtly, inserting herself between Dad and his longtime friends. The couples who had been fixtures at our dinner table for years were suddenly dismissed as too boring or stuck in the past. Dad's college roommate, who visited every summer without fail, was now deemed imposing. His sister, my beloved Aunt Sylvia, was, according to Tiffany, always criticizing Brenda. A baseless accusation, given I'd never once heard Aunt Sylvia say an unkind word about anyone. Gradually, our social circle shrank, replaced entirely by Tiffany's friends and colleagues. Dad, too, seemed to shrink, deferring to Tiffany on matters he once would have decided confidently on his own. By the time I left for UCLA, choosing a college as far from Boston as I could reasonably go, Dad was calling me less frequently, always when Tiffany was conveniently out. Our conversations felt rushed, guarded, filled with unspoken anxieties. Whenever I hinted at coming home for a weekend, there was always some reason it wasn't a good time. Tiffany was hosting a work event. Tiffany was remodeling the guest room. Tiffany thought it would be better if I visited only during scheduled breaks, when they could properly prepare. So I adapted. I spent holidays with friends or with Aunt Sylvia, who had been similarly exiled. I buried myself in my studies, double majoring in architecture and historic preservation, a quiet, heartfelt tribute to both my parents, a tribute that, sadly, went unrecognized by my father in his compromised state. Yet, even through the manipulation and distance, Dad found quiet ways to maintain our connection. He'd send care packages to my dorm, tucked inside, notes scrawled on napkins. Don't tell Tiffany how much chocolate I sent. He'd arrange business trips to California that conveniently coincided with my semester breaks. During these stolen moments, these brief respites from Tiffany's suffocating presence, I'd catch glimpses of my real father. The one who laughed easily, spoke passionately about his latest projects, and wasn't constantly checking his phone, anxious to respond to Tiffany's incessant texts. My senior year of college, Dad surprised me by flying out for a weekend, completely alone. Tiffany thinks I'm at a conference in Chicago, he confessed, a weary smile playing on his lips as we walked along the Santa Monica Pier. I needed to see you, Chloe. To talk to you without interference. That day, he asked detailed questions about my life, my studies, my goals after graduation. He seemed particularly interested in my thesis project on the adaptive reuse of historic properties. You have your mother's eye and my technical mind, he said, his voice filled with a familiar pride. The perfect combination. Before he left, he hugged me tighter than usual, a fierce, almost desperate embrace. I've made some mistakes, Chloe, he said, using my full name, as he always did when he was truly serious. But I want you to know that you are the most important person in my life. Never doubt that. I didn't know then that he was saying goodbye in his own quiet way. I didn't know he had already received his diagnosis. The call came on a Tuesday morning, a year later, during my first year working at a historic preservation firm in San Francisco. Aunt Sylvia's voice was tight with both grief and raw anger. Your father's sick, Chloe. It's cancer, pancreatic, and it's advanced. The doctors are giving him months, not years. The shock hit me physically, a visceral blow that made my knees buckle, sending me heavily into my office chair. How long has he known? I whispered, my voice barely a breath. At least 6 weeks, from what I can gather, Sylvia snapped, her fury barely contained. Tiffany's been controlling who gets information and when. I only found out because I ran into Ethan from your dad's firm. I was on a plane that afternoon. During the 5-hour flight, my mind raced, a frantic search for all the signs I might have missed. Dad had looked thinner on our last video chat, seemed tired, but I'd attributed it to a big project he was finishing. He mentioned stomach pain, but blamed it on Tiffany's experimental cooking phase. When I arrived at the house, my house, our house, though it hardly looked the same anymore, Tiffany answered the door. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. It was a practiced, chilling mask. Chloe, what a surprise, she drawled, subtly blocking the entrance. We weren't expecting you. I came as soon as I heard about Dad, I stated, refusing to play along with her transparent charade. Where is he? Your father is resting, she said, her voice laced with false concern. The medication makes him very tired. Perhaps you should have called. From behind her, I heard Dad's voice, weak but insistent. Is that Chloe? Let her in, Tiffany. She stepped aside reluctantly, her expression a thundercloud, and I rushed past her into the downstairs study, which had been converted to a bedroom for Dad. The sight of him nearly broke me. The robust, energetic man who had taught me to ride a bike and build model bridges was now thin, jaundiced, his designer clothes hanging loose on his frame. But his eyes, oh his eyes, they lit up when he saw me, and for a moment, he was just my dad again. Chloe, he said, reaching for me, his voice a frail whisper. My girl, you came. I sat beside him, taking his hand carefully, afraid of dislodging the 4 that ran to a port in his chest. Of course I came, I murmured, my voice thick with unshed tears. Why didn't you tell me sooner? He glanced towards the door where Tiffany still hovered. We didn't want to worry you until we had a treatment plan in place. I bit back my response. There was no we in this situation. I knew, with absolute certainty, that Tiffany had kept this from me deliberately, likely hoping Dad would be too sick to see me by the time I found out. Over the next few weeks, I took a leave of absence from my job, moving back into my old bedroom, which Tiffany, miraculously, hadn't yet converted into the home gym she'd been planning. I coordinated with Dad's doctors, arranged for a home health nurse, and spent every possible moment with him. Tiffany was visibly annoyed by my presence, but she couldn't object too strenuously without appearing heartless. So, instead, she resorted to subtle sabotages, rescheduling nurse visits without telling me, accidentally discarding the soft foods I'd prepared for Dad, insisting on accompanying him to appointments where she would speak over both of us, controlling the narrative. But she couldn't be there all the time. She had her real estate business to run, and social obligations she clearly deemed too important to miss, despite my father's rapidly declining condition. During these precious hours alone with Dad, we reconnected in a way we hadn't been able to in years. "I'm sorry, Chloe," he told me one afternoon as we looked through old family albums I'd rescued from the attic. "I let her come between us. Between me and everyone who mattered." "It's okay, Dad," I said, though we both knew it wasn't. "No, it's not," he insisted, a flash of his old conviction returning to his eyes. "I was weak. After your mother died, I was so lost. Tiffany was decisive when I couldn't be. Strong when I felt utterly broken. But that strength, it became a wall. I see that now." On days when he felt stronger, Dad would ask me to help him to the sunroom, the one space Tiffany hadn't. Completely redesigned, perhaps because she rarely used it. There, surrounded by the thriving offspring of my mother's beloved plants the housekeeper had quietly continued to tend, a silent act of defiance, Dad began to have mysterious, private conversations with me. "I need you to understand something, Chloe," he said one day, his voice barely above a whisper. "Things aren't always what they seem. I've made arrangements to make things right." "What kind of arrangements, Dad?" I asked, my heart pounding with a strange mix of hope and trepidation. But he just shook his head. "Not now. After. I need you to promise me you'll meet with Mr. Albright, my attorney, after I'm gone. No matter what happens at the reading of the will. Promise me." "I promise," I said, confused but unwilling to stress him by pressing for details. A part of me, a deep, knowing part, sensed the gravity of his words. As the weeks melted away and Dad grew weaker, I noticed Tiffany's attention shifting, subtly but unmistakably, from his care to his possessions. She began asking him pointed questions about his business, his accounts, his various properties. And then, her gaze fixated on the house. "We really should discuss selling, Arthur," she said one evening, thinking I was out of earshot. "This place is simply too big for me to manage alone. Too many stairs, too much maintenance. We could use the money for your treatments." We both knew Dad's insurance covered his treatments. And we both knew this house was worth millions in Boston's red-hot real estate market. Tiffany, who had entered the marriage with decidedly modest assets, clearly had her eyes on a massive windfall. "Not yet," Dad would reply week after week, his voice increasingly faint. "Let's focus on getting better." But we all knew he wasn't getting better. The treatments had failed to shrink the tumors, and Dad had made the courageous, heartbreaking decision to stop them, preferring quality of life over a slightly prolonged, agonizing existence. During his final week, Dad insisted on speaking to me alone each day. These conversations were often fragmented, jumping between cherished childhood memories and urgent, cryptic instructions. "The oak tree in the backyard, remember how we built that treehouse?" he'd murmur. "Mr. Albright has the papers. Your mother's jewelry is in the safe deposit box. Key in my desk. Mr. Albright knows. Trust Mr. Albright." I nodded, taking careful notes, unsure what was delirium and what was vitally important information. The night before he died, Dad had a moment of perfect lucidity. He gripped my hand with surprising strength, his eyes locking onto mine, clear and unwavering. "Chloe, I need you to forgive me. For Tiffany. For the lost years. But know this, I've always loved you more than anything in this world. And I've done everything I could to protect you. Remember that, when it seems like I didn't." I held his hand against my cheek, memorizing the feel of it, the warmth of his skin. "There's nothing to forgive, Dad," I whispered, tears blurring my vision. "I love you." He died peacefully the next morning, with me on one side of his bed and Tiffany on the other. In that moment of profound, shattering loss, I thought, perhaps naively, that grief might bridge the chasm between Tiffany and me, that we might find some common ground in loving and missing the same man. I was wrong. Terribly wrong. While I sat, shell-shocked and numb beside my father's body, Tiffany was already on the phone with the funeral director, meticulously planning a service that would reflect her taste, not Dad's wishes. The funeral was exactly as Tiffany wanted it: elaborate floral arrangements Dad would have found excessive, eulogies from her friends who barely knew him, and a lavish reception at an upscale hotel. Instead of the intimate gathering at home Dad had specified in notes I'd found in his desk. Throughout the service, Tiffany played the part of the devastated widow perfectly, accepting condolences with a practiced balance of dignity and visible grief. Yet, I noticed how quickly her expression changed when she thought no one was watching, the tears drying instantly, a cold, calculating look returning to her eyes as she assessed the attendees, likely mentally cataloging who would be useful to her moving forward. I stood beside her in the receiving line, accepting hugs from Dad's colleagues and friends, many of whom I hadn't seen in years, thanks to Tiffany's systematic isolation of my father. Several whispered how glad they were that I had been there for Dad at the end, how much he had always talked about me with pride, even during the years Tiffany had kept us apart. Aunt Sylvia stayed close to me throughout the day, a quiet, protective buffer between me and Tiffany's performative grief. "Your father adored you," she reassured me repeatedly, her voice firm. "Never doubt that, no matter what happens next." I didn't understand what she meant by "what happens next" until 2 days later, when we gathered at Mr. Albright's office for the reading of the will. His office was located in a distinguished historic brownstone in downtown Boston, the kind of place where generations of the city's most sensitive legal and financial matters had been handled with an air of discreet gravitas. The conference room, with its dark wood paneling, heavy leather chairs, and massive table, seemed designed to intimidate. I arrived early, needing a moment to compose myself before facing Tiffany again. Mr. Albright, a tall man in his 60s with silver hair and kind eyes peering out from behind wire-rimmed glasses, greeted me with unexpected warmth. "Chloe," he said, shaking my hand with both of his, a gesture of genuine empathy. "It's good to finally meet you, though I wish it were under better circumstances. Your father spoke of you often, and with great pride." Before I could respond, the door opened and Tiffany swept in, dressed in an expensive black suit that screamed wealthy widow rather than grieving wife. She was accompanied by a sharp-featured man carrying a leather portfolio, whom she introduced as her attorney, Mr. Thorne. The mere fact that she'd brought her own lawyer suggested she was anticipating something contentious. I glanced at Aunt Sylvia, who had arrived just after me, and she subtly raised an eyebrow in a silent acknowledgement of Tiffany's audacious move. "Shall we begin?" Mr. Albright asked once we were all seated. He opened a thick folder and cleared his throat. "This is the last will and testament of Arthur James Sterling, revised and signed 6 months ago, with myself and 2 colleagues as witnesses. 6 months ago. Just before Dad's diagnosis, if my timeline was correct." Mr. Albright began with the standard legal preamble, then moved to the specific bequests: Dad's cherished collection of architectural books to his firm, a generous donation to the Cancer Research Foundation established in my mother's name, his vintage car to his oldest college friend. Then came the items that, for me, truly mattered. To my daughter, Chloe Eleanor Sterling, I leave my personal effects, including photographs, my architectural drafting tools, and the family albums. I felt my stomach drop, a cold, sickening lurch. Personal effects? That's all? Additionally, to Chloe, I leave a cash bequest of $50,000. $50,000. It was generous under normal circumstances, yes, but given my father's vast wealth and our deep family history, it felt like a calculated afterthought, a pittance. I could feel Tiffany's smug smirk without even looking at her. "The remainder of my estate," Mr. Albright continued, his voice steady, "including all real property, financial accounts, investments, and business interests, I leave to my wife, Tiffany Campbell Sterling." The words hit me like physical blows, each one landing squarely in my chest. The house. My childhood home. My grandparents' legacy. The very place my father had promised would someday be mine to care for was now Tiffany's, along with everything else that defined my father's life and work. How could he do this? After all his mysterious comments about making things right, after all his hints about arrangements and instructions to meet with Mr. Albright, I must have made some small sound of distress because Aunt Sylvia reached over and gripped my hand tightly, a silent anchor in my swirling despair. "Are there any questions?" Mr. Albright asked, looking directly at me with an unreadable expression. Tiffany's attorney, Mr. Thorne, spoke up, his voice dripping with condescension. "Everything seems quite straightforward. My client is satisfied with the terms." I bet she was. In the space of 10 minutes, Tiffany had gone from a moderately successful real estate agent to a multimillionaire with significant property holdings. "Chloe," Mr. Albright prompted, his gaze still on me. "Any questions?" I wanted to scream, to demand explanations, to ask how my father could have betrayed not just me, but the generations of Sterlings who had carefully preserved our family home. Instead, I managed a stiff, choked no. "No questions." "Very well," Mr. Albright said, his tone still formal. "There are papers to sign regarding the transfer of assets. Tiffany, my assistant has those ready in the next room." Tiffany rose, triumphant, her eyes gleaming with avarice. "Take all the time you need to discuss knickknacks," she sneered, her voice dripping with disdain. "I have more pressing matters to attend to, like deciding what color to paint the living room. I'm thinking white, to brighten up all that dreary woodwork." She swept out with her attorney, leaving me stunned and shaking with a volatile mixture of grief and simmering rage. As soon as the door closed behind them, Mr. Albright's formal demeanor dissolved. He quickly crossed to a sideboard, poured a glass of water, and brought it to me. "Drink this," he instructed gently, his eyes now filled with a warmth I hadn't seen before. "And then listen very carefully. All is not as it appears, Chloe." I took the water automatically, my mind still reeling, incapable of processing his words. "What do you mean?" I managed to ask, my voice hoarse. "She got everything. The house, the money, everything he worked for." "Not exactly," he said, lowering his voice conspiratorially. He reached into an inner pocket of his suit jacket and withdrew a small, cream-colored envelope. "Your father asked me to give you this privately after the formal reading. And he asked me to tell you that you must meet me tomorrow at 10 a.m. at the Blackbird Cafe on Charles Street. Come alone. Tell no one." I took the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a note, written in my father's distinctive hand. "Chloe, what you heard today is not the full story. Mr. Albright will explain everything tomorrow. Trust him completely. Remember what I told you. Things aren't always what they seem. I've made arrangements. I love you more than anything. Dad." I looked up at Mr. Albright, a fragile, confused hope beginning to replace my despair. "I don't understand." "You will," he promised, his gaze unwavering. "Tomorrow. For now, play along. Let Tiffany believe she's won. It's what your father wanted." As I drove away from the attorney's office, I glanced in my rearview mirror at the magnificent Victorian that had been my home. The house I thought I'd never see again, except as a visitor, subject to Tiffany's mercy. I watched her go inside, already on her phone, likely sharing the news of her supposed windfall with her friends. Later that evening, as I sat in Aunt Sylvia's guest room, trying desperately to make sense of the day's bewildering events, I received a text from a high school friend who still lived in the neighborhood. "Just drove by your house. There's a coming soon sign from Tiffany's real estate company in the front yard. Is your dad selling?" My dad wasn't selling. My dad was gone. And Tiffany, as expected, wasn't wasting a single moment claiming her prize and turning it into cold, hard cash. The Blackbird Cafe was a small, unassuming establishment, nestled charmingly between a dusty bookstore and a vibrant florist on Charles Street. It was the kind of place locals treasured and tourists overlooked: mismatched furniture, a comforting aroma of coffee and old books, and, famously, the best scones in Boston. Dad and I used to come here on Saturday mornings when I was in high school. I arrived 15 minutes early, too anxious to wait any longer at Aunt Sylvia's. I chose a table in the back corner, strategically positioned so I could see both the entrance and, a habit from my years living in San Francisco, the emergency exit. At precisely 10 o'clock, Mr. Albright appeared, carrying a weathered leather briefcase that looked as though it had accompanied him through decades of legal practice. He ordered coffee for both of us before sitting down across from me. "Thank you for coming, Chloe," he said, his formal tone softening in the casual setting. "What I'm about to share with you was planned meticulously by your father over the past year. He wanted to protect you, but he needed to protect himself as well, at least until the end." "Protect himself? From Tiffany?" I asked, though it wasn't really a question. Mr. Albright nodded, his expression grave. "Your father realized, perhaps too late, the true nature of his marriage. By the time he understood what Tiffany truly was, he was already trapped in ways that made a simple divorce incredibly complicated." "What do you mean, complicated?" I challenged, my voice rising slightly. "Dad had all the money, all the power in that relationship." Mr. Albright smiled sadly. "Power isn't always about money, Chloe. Tiffany had gathered quite a collection of compromising information on your father. Business decisions that, taken out of context, could have been portrayed as unethical. Private struggles after your mother's death that could have severely damaged his reputation. Nothing illegal, nothing truly wrong, but enough that a vindictive ex-wife could have destroyed the firm he'd built over 30 years. I thought about the subtle, but undeniable changes in my father over the years of his marriage to Tiffany, how he'd become more withdrawn, more cautious, less the bold and principled man I'd grown up admiring. So he stayed with her, even though he knew she was toxic, I murmured, the realization a bitter pill. He did, Mr. Albright confirmed. But about 18 months ago, he came to me with a plan. He suspected his health was declining, though he hadn't yet received the formal diagnosis. He wanted to ensure that Tiffany would be provided for, as he had promised in their marriage vows, but he was absolutely determined that she would not be the one to inherit the Sterling family home. Mr. Albright opened his briefcase and removed a thick folder. "Your father created an irrevocable trust 3 years before he married Tiffany. At that time, he transferred ownership of the house to the trust, with himself as the beneficiary during his lifetime, and you as the successor beneficiary upon his death." My mind raced, struggling to keep up. But Well, reading yesterday, the will dealt with assets in your father's name at the time of his death. The house was not among those assets, though Tiffany never realized this. Your father maintained the fiction that he owned the house, paying for all maintenance and taxes from his personal accounts. The trust arrangement was buried in legal documents that Tiffany, despite her business acumen, never thought to investigate. He handed me the folder. "These are copies of all the relevant documents. The house is yours, Chloe. It has been, legally speaking, since the moment your father died. Tiffany has been living there as an unwitting guest for the past week." I opened the folder with trembling hands. There it was, in black and white, the Sterling Family Trust, with me named as trustee and beneficiary. Additional documents clearly showed the transfer of the house to the trust, dated 3 years before Dad and Tiffany's wedding. "But why the charade yesterday?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Why let me believe, even for a day, that I'd lost everything?" Mr. Albright's expression turned grave. "Your father knew Tiffany would fight any direct bequest of the house to you. He feared she might challenge the will, drag you through painful litigation, perhaps even damage the property out of spite if she knew she couldn't have it. He wanted her to reveal her true intentions, which she's done rather spectacularly by immediately putting the house on the market." He reached into his briefcase again and withdrew a sealed envelope. "Your father left this for you as well. He asked that I give it to you only after explaining the trust arrangement." The envelope contained a letter written in my father's distinctive architect's handwriting, precise block letters that had labeled so many blueprints over the years. "My dearest Chloe, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And Mr. Albright has explained the trust arrangement to you. I hope you can forgive the deception. I couldn't bear the thought of Tiffany destroying our family home or using it to manipulate you after I was gone. I realized too late the mistake I made in marrying her. By the time I understood who she truly was, I was trapped by circumstances I won't burden you with. But I would not allow my mistake to rob you of your birthright. The trust arrangement was created before Tiffany came into my life, and I kept it hidden from her throughout our marriage. The Sterling house is yours now, as it always should have been. I know I've disappointed you in many ways these past years. I let Tiffany come between us when I should have fought harder to keep you close. Please know that not a day went by when I didn't think of you, miss you, and feel immense pride in the remarkable woman you've become. What you do with the house now is entirely your decision. Keep it, sell it, renovate it. The choice is yours, but I wanted you to be the one to decide its fate, not Tiffany. There is one more thing. In the master bedroom, behind the reproduction of Monet's water lilies that Tiffany insisted on hanging, a ghastly thing, really, there is a small wall safe. The combination is your birthday. Inside, you'll find your mother's jewelry, which I managed to hide before Tiffany could modernize those too, along with some family papers I thought you might want to preserve. I love you, Chloe, more than you could ever know. I hope that in protecting this piece of our family history for you, I've begun to make amends for the years we lost. All my love, Dad. Tears streamed down my face as I finished reading, a profound wave of relief and sorrow washing over me. Mr. Albright discreetly passed me a fresh handkerchief. What happens now? I asked when I could finally speak again, my voice trembling. Now, Mr. Albright said, a small, satisfied smile playing on his lips, we wait for Tiffany to attempt to sell property she doesn't own. I've already alerted the title company that will handle any closing. They're aware of the trust's existence, but have been instructed not to reveal anything until Tiffany actually attempts to complete a sale. So, she's listing a house she doesn't own? I asked, a slow understanding of my father's elegant plan dawning on me. Exactly. She can show it, accept offers, even sign a purchase agreement. But when it comes time to transfer title, she'll discover she has no legal right to do so. The house is yours, Chloe. It has been all along. I sat back, overwhelmed by this dizzying reversal of fortune. Dad knew her so well. Knew exactly what she would do. Your father was a brilliant man, Mr. Albright agreed, his eyes twinkling. And he loved you very much. This was his final gift to you, not just the house itself, but the satisfaction of seeing justice done. As we finished our coffee, Mr. Albright provided me with the names of several excellent real estate attorneys who could help me navigate the coming confrontation with Tiffany. We agreed that I would continue staying with Aunt Sylvia for the time being, allowing Tiffany to proceed with her plans to sell the house, blissfully unaware of the meticulously laid trap awaiting her. One last thing, Mr. Albright said as we prepared to leave. Your father wanted you to have this, regardless of what you decide to do with the house. He handed me a small velvet box. Inside was a key on an antique silver keychain, elegantly engraved with the letter S. The original key to the front door, Mr. Albright explained. Your great-grandfather had it made when the family purchased the house. Your father thought you should be the one to hold it now. I closed my hand around the key, feeling its weight and history, a tangible link to generations past. Whatever happened next, this small piece of metal represented a connection to my family that Tiffany, with all her greed and malice, could never sever. The next 3 months required more patience than I knew I possessed. On Mr. Albright's advice, I maintained a low profile, staying with Aunt Sylvia and focusing on my work, which I was able to do remotely thanks to an understanding boss. Meanwhile, I kept tabs on Tiffany's activities through a network of family friends and neighbors who had, thankfully, never warmed to her. Mrs. Davies, who had lived next door for 40 years, called me weekly with updates. She's thrown out all your father's clothes. Mrs. Davies reported one week, her voice thick with outrage. Had a crew come and just cart everything away. Such a waste. Those beautiful suits. Another time, she's painting everything white deer. Everything. Even the mahogany paneling in the library. It's a crime against architecture. But the call I'd been waiting for came on a Tuesday afternoon in early spring. There's a for sale sign in the yard, Chloe. Mrs. Davies announced, her voice a mix of excitement and indignation. And a lockbox on the door. She's listing it with her own company. Asking price is $4.5 million. The house was worth at least that in Boston's market, especially given its history and prime location, but Tiffany wouldn't see a single penny of it. I thanked Mrs. Davies and immediately called Mr. Albright, who confirmed that the listing had indeed appeared in the multiple listing service that morning. "Now we wait," he said, his voice calm and steady. "Let her find a buyer. Let her get all the way to closing. Then we'll address the matter of actual ownership." I followed the listing online, watching as Tiffany hosted an open house that drew dozens of potential buyers. The virtual tour showed rooms I barely recognized, sterile white boxes, stripped of character and history. She'd removed built-in bookcases, covered original fireplaces with drywall, and replaced the hand-carved newel post on the main staircase with something sleek and modern. Each change felt like a personal assault, a fresh wound. Exactly 2 weeks after listing, the status changed to pending, meaning Tiffany had accepted an offer. According to Mr. Albright's sources at the title company, the buyers were a tech executive and his wife, David and Sarah Miller, relocating from Seattle, prepared to pay the full asking price in cash. That's when Tiffany called me. I'd been expecting it. This final twist of the knife. This golden opportunity to gloat. "Chloe," she said when I answered, her voice syrupy with false concern. "I realized I never told you about the house." "What about it?" I asked, keeping my voice utterly neutral, my heart a hammer against my ribs. "I've sold it," she announced triumphantly, unable to contain her glee. "I know how attached you were to that old place, but it was just too much house for one person. The new owners are a lovely couple. They're planning to gut the inside completely. Something about open concept and smart home technology." I gripped my phone tighter, digging my nails into my palm, but maintained my calm. "I see. Of course, I did set aside a few of your old things from the attic," she continued, her voice dripping with condescension. "Photo albums and such. Nothing valuable, of course, but they might have sentimental worth to you. You can pick them up before closing next week." "That's thoughtful of you," I managed, a razor-thin edge to my voice. "I thought so," she purred. "Oh, and Chloe, I wanted you to know I sold the house to teach you a lesson about respect. Maybe next time you'll think twice before trying to turn your father against me." My blood boiled at the accusation, as if I had been the manipulative one in this twisted scenario. "The new owners move in next week," she continued, clearly enjoying every venomous syllable. "So, if you want to say goodbye to the place, you should do it soon. Though, honestly, you might not recognize it anymore." That's when I allowed myself a small, private smile, thinking of the documents safely stored in Mr. Albright's office and the antique key I now wore on a chain around my neck. "Good luck with that," I replied simply. "What's that supposed to mean?" she demanded, her tone shifting instantly from smug to suspicious. "Nothing," I said, my voice sweet. "I'm sure everything will work out exactly as it should. Goodbye, Tiffany." I hung up and immediately called Mr. Albright to let him know that closing was scheduled for the following week. He promised to have our legal team ready. "Should I be there?" I asked, my pulse quickening. "Absolutely," he said, a note of quiet anticipation in his voice. "After all, you're the only one who can actually transfer ownership of the property." The week passed in a blur of preparation. Mr. Albright arranged for a court reporter to be present to document the proceedings, ensuring everything was on the record. We alerted the title company's legal department, who prepared the necessary paperwork to clarify the true ownership. I even had a locksmith make a new set of keys for the front door. The original, the antique S key, would remain around my neck, a talisman, but I might need spares depending on what I decided to do with the house. The morning of the closing, I dressed carefully in a tailored navy suit that projected both professionalism and a quiet authority. Aunt Sylvia drove me to the title company's office, squeezing my hand tightly before I got out of the car. "Arthur would be so proud of you, honey," she whispered, her eyes shining with emotion. "Go get your house back." I met Mr. Albright in the lobby, and together we waited until everyone else had arrived before making our entrance. Through the glass doors of the conference room, I could see Tiffany holding court, laughing a little too loudly with the real estate agents and the prospective buyers, David and Sarah Miller, a professionally polished couple in their 40s. Papers were spread across the large table, pens at the ready. Mr. Albright and I exchanged a glance, and he nodded. It was time. When we walked in, Tiffany's triumphant smile froze on her face. "Chloe? What are you doing here?" she stammered, her voice laced with confusion. "Hello, Tiffany," I said calmly, my voice steady, betraying none of the fierce adrenaline coursing through my veins. "I believe you're trying to sell my house." The conference room at Boston Trust Title Company fell utterly silent as all eyes turned to me. Tiffany recovered quickly, her smile tightening into something predatory. "Chloe is my late husband's daughter," she explained to the confused buyers, her voice saccharine. "She's having some trouble accepting the sale, but I assure you everything is in order." She turned back to me, her voice hardening, a dangerous glint in her eyes. "This is highly inappropriate, Chloe. If you wanted to say goodbye to the house, you should have done it earlier." David Miller looked distinctly uncomfortable. "Perhaps we should give you a moment to sort this out," he suggested tentatively. "That won't be necessary," Mr. Albright interjected smoothly, placing his briefcase on the table with a soft thud that seemed to echo in the sudden quiet. "I'm Edward Albright, attorney for Chloe Sterling. And I'm afraid Mrs. Sterling is correct. You are indeed attempting to sell property that doesn't belong to you, Miss Campbell." "It's Mrs. Sterling," Tiffany snapped, her carefully constructed facade beginning to crack. "And the house absolutely belongs to me. Arthur left everything to me in his will." We all heard it read. The title company representative, a woman named Miss Chin, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. "We have a copy of Mr. Sterling's will on file, which does indeed leave his estate to his wife, Tiffany Campbell Sterling. The will addresses assets that were in Arthur Sterling's name at the time of his death," Mr. Albright explained, opening his briefcase and withdrawing a folder. "However, the property at 47 Beacon Hill Avenue was not among those assets." He handed a document to Miss Chen. "This is the deed transferring ownership of the property to the Sterling Family Trust. Dated May 15, 2016, 3 years before Mr. Sterling married his wife." Miss Chen examined the document carefully, then nodded. "This appears to be in order, but I'll need to see the trust documents as well." Mr. Albright produced another set of papers. "The trust designates Arthur Sterling as beneficiary during his lifetime, with Chloe Sterling as successor beneficiary upon his death. Chloe is also named as trustee." Tiffany's face had gone from confidence to confusion to incandescent fury in the space of seconds. "This is ridiculous. Arthur never mentioned any trust to me. He couldn't have done this without my knowledge." "On the contrary," Mr. Albright replied calmly, "the trust was established long before you entered the picture, Ms. Campbell. Mr. Sterling had no obligation to inform you of its existence, particularly as it concerned property that was never part of your marital assets." Ms. Chin was now reviewing the trust documents with increasing concern. These appeared to be legally executed and properly recorded with the county. She turned to her computer, typing rapidly. "Yes, here it is in the property records. The last transfer of this property was to the Sterling Family Trust in 2016. Tiffany's real estate agent, a polished woman in an expensive suit, leaned forward, her face pale. "There must be some mistake. We ran title searches before listing the property." "You ran a name search for Arthur Sterling, I imagine," Mr. Albright said, his voice subtly triumphant. "But as the property was owned by a trust, not an individual, it wouldn't have appeared in those results." Sarah Miller, the female buyer, looked increasingly distressed. "What does this mean for our purchase?" she asked, her voice tight with worry. Miss Chin sighed, looking apologetic. "It means that Mrs. Sterling, Tiffany Sterling, does not have the legal right to sell this property. She is not the owner." "This is absurd." Tiffany exploded, standing up so abruptly that her chair rolled backward and hit the wall with a deafening crash. "Arthur and I lived in that house for 5 years. I've been paying the property taxes since his death. Using funds from the estate, I imagine," Mr. Albright noted, a hint of steel in his voice. "Funds that were rightfully left to you, but the house itself was never yours to sell." Tiffany turned to me, her carefully maintained facade crumbling entirely to reveal the raw, unadulterated rage beneath. "You knew about this?" You let me list the house, find buyers, go through this whole process knowing I couldn't sell it. Yes, I said simply, meeting her furious gaze head-on. Just like you knew the house meant everything to me and still planned to sell it out from under me without a single thought. I'll fight this, she threatened, looking around wildly, desperately. I'll contest the trust. Arthur wasn't in his right mind when he set this up. He was manipulated. Mr. Albright smiled thinly, a chillingly polite smile. The trust was established years before his illness, Miss Campbell. And it was witnessed by myself and 2 other attorneys, all of whom will testify to Mr. Sterling's sound mind and clear intentions. But by all means, pursue litigation if you wish. Discovery would be illuminating, I imagine. The implication was clear. Any legal battle would inevitably expose whatever compromising information Tiffany had used to control my father during their marriage. Tiffany's face went white, then mottled red with fury. She turned to her real estate agent, her voice a desperate hiss. Call my lawyer. Now. While the agent stepped out to make the call, Miss Chin addressed the Millers apologetically. I'm very sorry, but we cannot proceed with this closing. The seller does not have legal title to the property. David Miller looked understandably upset. We've already given notice on our apartment. We're supposed to move in next week. I felt a pang of genuine sympathy for the couple caught so unexpectedly in the middle of this toxic drama. Mr. and Mrs. Miller, I said, speaking directly to them. I apologize for this entire situation. You should know that I have no intention of keeping you from the home you've chosen. If you're still interested, as the actual owner, I would be happy to sell you the property directly. Sarah Miller blinked in surprise. You would? Of course, I replied, a small, knowing smile touching my lips. We can discuss terms that would be fair to everyone, except perhaps Miss Campbell's commission, I added, unable to resist the small, satisfying dig. Tiffany's lawyer arrived within 20 minutes, a different attorney than the one who had accompanied her to the will reading. This one was older, with the harried, rumpled look of someone called away from truly important work for an unexpected emergency. After reviewing the documents, he pulled Tiffany aside for a whispered, urgent conference in the corner. I couldn't hear the specific words, but the increasingly desperate, almost panicked tone of Tiffany's responses told me all I needed to know. Her lawyer was confirming what Mr. Albright had stated. She had no legal claim to the house. When they returned to the table, Tiffany's lawyer addressed the room, his voice strained. My client needs time to review her options. We request that all parties suspend any further action regarding this property until we've had a chance to examine these documents more thoroughly. Of course, Mr. Albright agreed smoothly, a barely perceptible smirk on his face. However, I should note that as of this moment, Miss Campbell is residing in a property owned by Chloe Sterling without permission. Ms. Sterling would be entirely within her rights to demand immediate vacancy. It was a power move, and everyone in the room knew it. Legally, I could have Tiffany removed from the house immediately. Tiffany's lawyer cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. We would request a reasonable accommodation to allow my client time to relocate. I thought of all the times Tiffany had been utterly unreasonable with me, blocking my visits to see my dying father, disposing of irreplaceable family heirlooms without asking, attempting to sell my childhood home out of pure spite. I could have been equally vindictive, now that the power had shifted decisively. Instead, I said, 2 weeks. She can have 2 weeks to pack her things and find new accommodations. But I'll need access to the house starting tomorrow to assess what renovations will be needed before the Millers can move in. Ms. Chin, apparently relieved that we were moving towards resolution rather than protracted litigation, quickly drew up temporary agreements for everyone to sign, acknowledging the true ownership of the property, setting a timetable for Tiffany's departure, and establishing preliminary terms for my direct sale to the Millers. Throughout this process, Tiffany sat rigid with fury, her face a mask of barely controlled rage, signing the papers with such force that she actually tore through one of them. When the final document was completed, she stood up and addressed me directly, her voice a low, venomous hiss. You think you've won, don't you? You have no idea what your father was really like. The things he did, the secrets he kept. He wasn't the saint you think he was. I never thought he was a saint, I replied calmly, meeting her gaze without flinching. He was human. He made mistakes, marrying you, being chief among them. But he was a good man who loved his family and tried to protect what mattered. This isn't over, she hissed, gathering her designer purse and coat, her eyes blazing. Actually, Tiffany, it is, I said, standing to face her, my voice clear and firm. The house is mine. Your game is finished. And in 2 weeks, you'll be nothing but an unpleasant memory in our family history. She stormed out, her real estate agent hurrying after her, stammering apologies. The Millers remained, looking utterly shell-shocked by the drama they'd just witnessed. Does this sort of thing happen often in Boston real estate? David asked weakly, a nervous laugh escaping him. Mr. Albright chuckled. Only when exceptionally devious people meet exceptionally good planning. We spent the next hour discussing the terms of sale with the Millers, who were surprisingly understanding once they realized they could still purchase the house they'd fallen in love with, and at a slightly lower price now that Tiffany's commission was out of the equation. As we left the title company, Mr. Albright placed a fatherly hand on my shoulder. Your dad would be proud. You handled that with grace and dignity, more than Tiffany deserved. Truthfully, I didn't do it for her, I said, fingering the key that still hung around my neck. I did it for Dad. And for myself. Some battles aren't worth fighting, not when you've already won the war. The next day, armed with my original key and the undisputed legal documents confirming my ownership, I returned to the house that had been my home for the first 18 years of my life. Tiffany's car was gone. Presumably, she was out searching for a new place to live or consulting with her lawyer about non-existent loopholes. I stood on the front steps for a long moment, tracing the familiar pattern of the leaded glass in the door's window. Then I inserted the key that had been in my family for generations, turned it in the lock, and stepped inside to reclaim my birthright. 2 weeks after the showdown at the title company, I stood in the empty foyer of my family home, listening to the echo of the front door closing behind Tiffany for the final time. She had departed with as much drama as she'd lived, hiring an excessive number of movers, making pointed comments about items she was generously leaving behind, and finally, delivering a sealed envelope that she claimed contained the truth about your father. I had accepted the envelope politely, waited until she was gone, and then promptly dropped it, unopened, into the fireplace in the library, one of the few original features she hadn't managed to destroy during her redecorating frenzy. Whatever truth Tiffany thought would hurt me didn't matter anymore. I had my own truth, confirmed by Dad's actions and his final, loving letter. The house felt simultaneously familiar and foreign. The bones were the same, the grand staircase, the high ceilings, the distinctive crown moldings that had, miraculously, survived Tiffany's modernization efforts. But the spirit had been altered by her cold white paint, the removal of built-in bookshelves, and the replacement of antique fixtures with trendy, anonymous modern alternatives. I had sold the house to the Millers as promised, but with a contingency that gave me 2 months to live there before they took possession. I needed that time to reconnect with the home, to decide what items to keep, and to oversee the restoration of some of the architectural features Tiffany had so carelessly damaged. My first night alone in the house, I wandered from room to room, reacquainting myself with the spaces that had shaped my childhood. In my old bedroom, now stripped of personality and painted the same sterile white as the rest of the house, I could still see the ghost shadows of where my posters had hung, the slight indentation in the window seat where I'd spent countless hours reading. I saved the master bedroom for last. It had been my parents' room, then Dad and Tiffany's, and I entered it with a mix of reverence and trepidation. Tiffany had completely redesigned the space, replacing the warm cherry furniture with sleek gray and chrome pieces, covering the original hardwood floors with white carpet, and, just as Dad had mentioned in his letter, hanging an oversized reproduction of Monet's water lilies over the fireplace. I carefully removed the artwork, revealing the small wall safe, just as Dad had described. My fingers trembled slightly as I entered my birthday, 6/29, into the combination lock. The mechanism clicked, and the heavy door swung open. Inside were several velvet jewelry boxes, a thick manila envelope, and a smaller white envelope with my name written in Dad's distinctive handwriting. I opened the white envelope first. My darling Chloe, if you're reading this, you've reclaimed your birthright and discovered the safe. Inside, you'll find your mother's jewelry, which she always intended for you to have. The sapphire set was her favorite. She wore it the night we got engaged. The manila envelope contains family papers, including the original deed to the house from your great-grandparents' purchase. There are also some of my private journals, which I hope will help you understand the choices I made, both good and bad. I have one last confession, Chloe. In the last years of our marriage, as Tiffany became more controlling and I became more ill, I began secretly restoring some of the family heirlooms she thought she had disposed of. Look in the attic, behind the chimney access panel. There you'll find the items I managed to save: your mother's favorite books, photographs Tiffany removed from albums, the hand-carved music box your grandfather made for you. I couldn't save everything, and for that, I'm sorry. But I saved what mattered most as I tried, in my imperfect way, to save what mattered most for you: this house, your inheritance, your future. Live well, Chloe. Be happy and know that wherever I am proud of the woman you've become. All my love, Dad. Tears streamed down my face as I clutched the letter to my chest. Even in his final months, weakened by disease and controlled by Tiffany, Dad had been fighting for me in his own quiet, brilliant way. He hadn't been perfect, no. His choice to marry Tiffany had caused us both immense pain, but he had done his absolute best to make amends, to protect what he could for me. I opened the jewelry boxes one by one, memories flooding back with each glittering piece. Mom's pearl earrings that she wore to every Christmas Eve service. The delicate gold bracelet Dad had given her on their anniversary. And yes, the sapphire set, a necklace, earrings, and ring that matched Mom's eyes perfectly. The manila envelope contained exactly what Dad had promised: family documents, his personal journals, and photographs I had thought lost forever. I would read the journals eventually, but not yet. Tonight was about reconnection, not diving into Dad's private thoughts. I made my way to the attic, flashlight in hand, and located the chimney access panel. Behind it, just as Dad had described, was a hidden cache of family treasures, items Tiffany had carelessly discarded or hidden, that Dad had secretly recovered and preserved. Mom's dog-eared copy of Pride and Prejudice with her notes in the margins. The family photo albums spanning generations. The music box my grandfather had carved, which still played Somewhere Over the Rainbow when wound. My parents' wedding album. Dad's collection of architectural awards. I spent hours in the attic that night, surrounded by these rescued fragments of my family history, alternately crying and laughing as memories washed over me, a balm to my soul. By the time I descended the stairs, dawn was breaking, and I had made a decision. Over the next 2 months, I threw myself into a careful, selective restoration of the house. I didn't try to erase all of Tiffany's changes. Some of her modernizations actually complemented the historic features rather than fighting them. But I restored the library's built-in bookshelves, painstakingly refinished the hardwood floors she had covered, and reinstalled the antique light fixtures I found, carefully wrapped and labeled, in the basement. The Millers visited weekly to discuss the renovations, their initial weariness giving way to genuine enthusiasm as they saw the house's transformation. They had young children who would soon fill these rooms with laughter again, and they deeply appreciated the blend of historic character and modern amenities I was creating. "We'll preserve the heart of the house," David promised during their final visit before I moved out. "Our kids will know its history." On my last night in the house, I sat in Dad's study, the one room Tiffany had left mostly untouched, perhaps because she rarely entered it. I had packed the items I was keeping: Mom's jewelry, the family photographs and documents, Dad's architectural tools, and a few pieces of furniture with special significance. The rest would stay with the house, part of its continuing story. I felt a profound sense of peace sitting in Dad's worn leather chair, surrounded by his books and the subtle scent of his pipe tobacco that somehow lingered, years after he'd given up smoking. The house had been reclaimed, Not just from Tiffany, but from the grief and distance that had separated Dad and me during his marriage. Through his final act of love and protection, he had restored our connection, even after death. The lesson wasn't lost on me. Dad had made mistakes. We all do. He had allowed fear and manipulation to separate him from those he loved most. But in the end, he had found the courage to make amends, to protect what truly mattered, to ensure that justice would eventually prevail. I had learned that patience sometimes serves justice better than immediate confrontation, that playing the long game, as Dad had done with his secret trust arrangement, can be far more effective than impulsive reaction. That forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or excusing, but rather freeing yourself from the burden of bitterness. Most importantly, I had learned that family legacy isn't just about houses or possessions. It's about values passed down, lessons learned, love expressed, even imperfectly. Dad had preserved our family home for me, yes, but far more precious was the example he'd set through his final acts, showing me that it's never too late to try to make things right. As the first light of dawn filtered through the study windows, painting the room in soft hues, I rose from Dad's chair and took one last, lingering look around. I wouldn't be living here anymore, but I had reclaimed what truly mattered: my heritage, my memories, my peace of mind. And Tiffany's desperate attempt to erase all of that had ultimately, spectacularly, failed. Sometimes justice comes in unexpected ways. Sometimes the most powerful response to cruelty isn't dramatic confrontation, but quiet, methodical planning. Sometimes winning doesn't mean destroying your opponent, but simply taking back what is rightfully yours and moving forward with grace. As I closed the front door behind me for the final time, I felt Dad's presence beside me, his hand symbolically on my shoulder. "We did it, Dad," I whispered, a tear escaping. "We showed her that some things can't be bought, sold, or stolen. Some things are protected by love." What about you? Have you ever had to deal with someone trying to take something that was rightfully yours? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories and your advice in the comments below. And if this tale of family justice satisfied something deep in your soul, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of people standing up for themselves in the face of injustice. Remember to share this with anyone who might need a reminder that sometimes the good guys really do win in the end. Thank you for listening, and remember, patience and planning often triumph over greed and manipulation.